Hey, hope everyone is doing well. I am recording this or I have recorded this by opening or creating a Zoom meeting for myself, opening that Zoom meeting, and pardon me, yes, I just want to make sure that I have this here. And then recording the Zoom meeting, and now I'm going to share my screen and continue to record. So what I'm trying to say is all you have to do is create your own Zoom meeting, share your screen, give you a presentation, and then you can either put the video on YouTube, which I'm going to do. You can put the video on YouTube, or you can compress it and put it into a zipped file and upload it to Moodle, or you can use a hosting site like WeShare or something along those lines. Okay, if you have any questions about how to record this, please ask as soon as possible. I will be on vacation during the break, and I will not answer emails about how to record your presentation. So I know students kind of wait until the last minute to do things that are due. I was a student once as well. But I would at least do some practice runs and see if you're able to make this happen. Okay. All right, then I'm going to share my presentation. I'm going to share it via PDF because I think that's the easiest. Okay, so now I'm officially starting my presentation. Hey guys, I got a quick anecdote for you, and I just want you to know that this anecdote is not meant to be a flex or talk about how great I am. I think this is a pretty common situation for a lot of you young people out there. You go to bars, maybe, or you go to cafes, go to clubs, party, you meet people, and so I think it's a fairly typical situation that everyone can identify with. Okay, so I would say about 13 years ago, I was in a kind of a posh bar and lounge. So a bar and lounge it has a dance floor. It's like a mix between a club and a bar. Excuse me. And it was pretty posh, pretty fancy schmancy. And it was in downtown Manhattan, and I was having a good time with my friends. And I started talking to two Swiss girls, and they were from the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. And obviously, I don't want to say obviously, they were obviously beginning to flirt with me. So I continued to talk to them and joke around and have a good time. And then at the end of the night, I said, "Okay, ladies, enjoy your stay in New York," and I left. And my friend turned to me and said something very politically incorrect. He said, "What are you, gay?" And I turned to him and I said, "So what if I was?" And he said, "No, I don't mean it like that. I mean, you had two pretty women paying attention to you and you didn't take it any further." And I looked at him, in our semi-drunken state, and I said to him, "Why? Why do I have to take it further?" And he said, "Well, I think pretty much any guy would." And I said, "Well, just because I can doesn't mean I should." And I had the feeling that these women were just interested in something casual, and I wasn't feeling it. But that aside, my philosophy for my whole life has pretty much been just because I can doesn't mean I should. And I go with my gut feeling every time, should I do something? Of course, I make mistakes. But this is the philosophy I've tried to live by. And I think that as in let's say the last 30 or 40 years, I think we have become a culture in the West who really gives into all of their impulses, whether they be sexual impulses, impulses about food and eating, impulses about entertainment, um, impulses concerning drinking and drugs. I think that we as a society in the West, so I'm talking Europe, America, Canada, Australia, all the Western nations, have really become a society where we give in to our impulses of desire and pleasure to the point where it has become something really damning, really terrible, and I think threatens to destroy us mentally and emotionally. And so, This little story brings me to my topic for the day: depressive anhedonia, the philosophy of 21st century emptiness. So, my name is Andrew Small. I am a teacher in your various kommunikative Fertigkeiten groups, and I am going to give you a presentation on this particular topic. My presentation should take about 5 to 7 minutes, and I will divide it into several parts. Now, I don't have an agenda slide. I don't have a table of contents slide. I forgot this, but I will take you through my table of contents verbally. First, I am going to tell you about what depressive anhedonia is. Secondly, I'm going to refer to the theorist Mark Fisher, who coined this term. He created this term, and some of the examples and experiences he's had as a professor in the UK, in London, or he's passed away. He had. And then after that, I'm going to tell you how I think it affects my life and how it could affect your life. And finally, I'm going to give some ways you can combat depressive anhedonia, that you can get out of the matrix, as Andrew Tate and other YouTube right-wing idiots would say. But I do believe we do live in a matrix. I just don't believe it's the matrix that they're talking about. I believe it is a matrix of pleasure. So first, what is depressive anhedonia? Well, we can't talk about depressive anhedonia without talking about depression and anhedonia. So depression is the state of anhedonia, which means you're unable to derive pleasure. Yeah, there is an inability to derive pleasure. Going out with your friends doesn't bring you pleasure. Spending time with family doesn't bring you pleasure. Eating delicious foods doesn't bring you pleasure. Pleasurable activities don't seem to bring you pleasure anymore. And in the past, this has typically been described as a issue with endorphins such as serotonin in the brain. I believe that depression nowadays has different causes. If there's time, I will get into that. So depressive anhedonia is not the absence of the ability to uh, experience pleasure, but the inability to experience anything else but pleasure. And this term was coined by theorist Mark Fisher in his book Capitalist Realism: Is There No Alternative? And he explains the causes for anhedonia, depressive anhedonia, are a result of two things: reflective impotence and neoliberalism. Now, even though I put the reflexive impotence first, I'm going to talk about neoliberalism first. Okay? So, neoliberalism is an economic and political ideology that emerged in the mid 20th century, 1970s. And it was really pioneered by Ronald Reagan, the President of the United States at the time, and Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of England at the time. And it is characterized by a belief in the power of free markets, limited government, and the promotion of individual entrepreneurship. Now, this all sounds good, right? What's wrong with more entrepreneurs? What's wrong with the power of free markets? But what neoliberalism tends to do is it degrades the power of society, the power of government. So the power of free public institutions. So basically everything transforms into a market. And what Reagan and Thatcher like to do is say, well, you like choice when you pick shampoo, right? When you pick the food you want to eat. So shouldn't you have more of a choice when you choose your healthcare provider, when you choose package delivery systems or mail delivery systems, and things like that, not things like that, it's a word we want to correct, and additional related details. However, what is the point of living in a society if we're not going to take care of one another, if we're not going to look out for one another? This is why ancient humans formed society in the past, for protection, because they are stronger as a unit rather than an individual. And neoliberalism emphasizes the importance of the individual over everything else. In view of this fact, Mark Fisher has created the term reflective impotence. And I think you understand impotence and reflexive. They're both words, they're both cognates in German and English. And reflexive impotence in the eyes of Mark Fisher is we all know things are bad. They're not getting better. They're getting worse, and they're getting worse slowly in pieces. Things are being stripped from us. Things are being taken away from us and being turned into a market where you have to pay for this and pay for that and too many choices. But there's also this feeling that we can't do anything about it. We all know it's bad, and we all know we can't do anything about it. Maybe you don't know this consciously, but inside you kind of know. I read an interesting quote recently that said, hey, we all know the solutions to climate change. Deep down inside, we all know they are very illegal. Yeah. And sitting on the street and having police officers carry us away or holding signs and walking through the streets, not going to do anything. It's not going to really do anything. Everybody is already aware of this. We don't need to create more awareness. People just don't care. Okay, so with that said, what are some examples outlined by Mark Fisher as a professor? Well, he says that because of reflexive impotence, and I'm sorry about this typo here with the bullet point, I had to do this very quickly. Because of reflexive impotence, we all give into pleasure. We all don't want to carry around this existential misery and fear and helplessness, so we give into pleasure. And he uses the context of his classroom as an example how students have become engaged heavily into depressive anhedonia. So a lesson, historically, a lesson has a hierarchy where the teacher is at the head of the hierarchy and the students are required to be obedient. Now, be that as it may, we have seen an incredible shift in the idea of what a classroom should look like. If you've been in my classroom, which you have, I'm a very relaxed guy. I try to look at you at the same eye level. However, is this really a good thing when we have depressive anhedonia all around us? And here is perhaps why. Mark Fisher states that because of depressive anhedonia and plugging into our various systems of pleasure, whether they be entertainment, food, alcohol, sex, or anything else, students nowadays have the inability to focus when outside of this matrix, outside of these various matrices of pleasure. So the problem of, for example, YouTube, in view of the fact that YouTube allows you to upload content, watch content, and now not only in video form, but in short reel form, we are able to be entertained instantly around the clock and switch through it very quickly if we are not entertained. Now, taking a student out of this matrix of entertainment for even 90 minutes creates an inability to focus, an inability to realize, okay, not everything has to be fun. Sometimes work is just work and it has other benefits. So students are not able to rationalize this. And he does outline some historical evidence and sources that point to the fact that students maybe in the 1800s, they were bored in their classes, but worked harder than students work in their classes today. Now, I'm not putting all the blame on students. There are other reasons for that. This is just Mark Fisher's perspective on the student role in this situation. And he gives examples of students slumping in chairs, sighing, snacking incessantly, or even eating full meals. And I'm guilty. I allow my students to eat in class. It doesn't bother me, but I am aware of the fact that we live in a modern and hectic world, and sometimes you're starving and don't have an opportunity to eat. He also talks about how students talk incessantly. So oftentimes when I'm giving a lecture or we're in our Übung, our tutorial, which is what kommunikative Fertigkeiten is, students are talking while I'm speaking and explaining something. And of course, this is nothing new under the sun, but that understanding of hierarchy, respect, has completely devolved and disappeared. And he says that students have the inability to remain on task. So they work very, very hard to complete a task quickly without much detail. And then, okay, I'm done. Give me the next task. Or I have to look at my phone again. I have to look at my computer again. Okay, so whether or not you believe this is the case, I think there is quite a bit of merit here. Meaning, I think the examples he outlines in his actual book are quite useful and quite convincing. Okay, so with that said, what's my take on the situation? How do I feel about students or even myself? Well, first, I'd like to talk to you about how I view my students, you guys, and secondly, how I view myself as a participant in this world with depressive anhedonia all around us. So I believe that students must be entertained at all times, and sometimes this is most of the time, I think this creates poor lessons on my end. My primary focus becomes entertainment as opposed to education. And I think it creates chaotic and muddled lessons, confusing sometimes. And I think teachers these days have become more like edutainers because they have to compete with all the entertainment that exists out there. And when they're plucking their students out of this matrix, they have to replace it in some way. And in light of this fact, should we not become edutainers, then we have become abductors. So I mean like kidnappers, your jailers, your wardens. Then I feel like if I go back to the old school way of teaching, I feel more like I am you are my prisoners and I am keeping you in this prison of education. Now, that's how I feel about education at the moment and my relationship with some students. But what do I think about my place in the world right now and my and the general behavior of people? I think when neoliberalism, excuse me, came around and turned, sorry, I don't want to say I think. I would like to say considering neoliberalism came around in the 1970s and has existed since then, I think the idea that everything becomes a market has also bled into human relationships. I think nowadays romantic relationships are very fleeting and transactional. So I think a lot of people want a quick fix when it comes to a romantic relationship. And I don't just mean sexually, I mean emotionally as well. They want to engage in a transactional relationship. And when I say transactional, I mean like a purchasing relationship. I purchase something, you provide something. That's a transaction. It's like a Kauf oder Einkauf. And I believe that romantic relationships, the way they're being presented on TV, the way they're being presented in apps, and the way we're feeling about them are are becoming very fleeting and transactional. So quick, and what do I get? What do you give? I don't want to work very hard at this because I can just go and purchase a new relationship. Furthermore, I feel like a lot of people are just live for the weekend. We don't take stock and take importance or realize the importance of every minute in every day. And we live for the weekend because the weekend offers the most pleasure. We can get wasted. We can binge watch TV series. Um, we are not as exhausted from the choices and at the choices that we have to. I'm sorry. We are not as exhausted as during the week. I don't want to get too complicated here. Um, and I think educate. I don't want to keep saying I think because you guys will say that very often. I'm of the opinion that a lot of students, including myself, when I was in school and I finished my master's degree in 2015, believe they are not really at an educational institution to learn, but they are there to receive a grade or a degree, and then they'll just forget about what they've studied. It only matters the number or letter that I receive at the end, or the document that I receive at the end. And I'm not saying this is all students' fault. The institutions have a hand in this, and actually the institutions are the biggest problem in this. But I believe that this is how students view education these days. A market, transactional. I'm purchasing this. My investment is my time, and I will get and I will obtain a degree later on. But I'm not really doing anything holistic or really building myself or learning. And I've conducted a number of interviews with students that have helped me believe this fact, or this opinion, have brought me to this opinion. And here's where depressive anhedonia really kicks in. We all know something is missing or not working somehow, but we do it anyway. We just follow the rules because we have enough things to busy us, to occupy our attention and to occupy our time. So if I'm starting to feel depressed, I can go on Tinder and have a very many flings, or I can go and eat amazingly delicious fast food in a huge portions, or I can binge watch series after series. And generations before us, they didn't have these things to constantly replace this feeling of, something is missing. I better do something about it. Okay. Now I'd like to end here with some honesty. I didn't have a smartphone when I was doing my bachelor's degree. I finished my bachelor's degree in 2009, and I didn't have a smartphone. We don't have the technology that you do now, but I drew in class, doodled all over my notebook. I slept. Sometimes I partied the night before. In the US, we call Thursday Thirsty Thursday. And I engaged in that heavily, and I would sleep in Friday classes. And our classes are quite large, so I got away with it. I texted on my phone. I ignored the teacher as well. This is just a part of growing up. This is a part of maturity. And I think even people my age now, as you know, I'm 35. If you stick me in a presentation that's too long, or a class that's too long and it's not really catching my interest, I'm going to do other things as well. I'm not saying this is all a Gen Z problem, or this is a millennial problem, or this is a boomer problem. Now everyone is in the same circumstance. So this seems like a pretty harsh, miserable prognosis, right? So how can we combat these things? How can we fight these things? Well, I'd like to give you the individual ways you can combat this first. And then at the end, I'm going to go into the collective way, which I think is the number one and most important way. But how can you combat it? Well, excuse me. Firstly, I think meditation and mindfulness are an incredibly important part of improving our personal situations. And as you see here, I wrote meditation, mindfulness, and not McMindfulness. So what do I mean by this? Well, in a world where everything is a market and everything is a product, so too is meditation and mindfulness a product. Yoga courses, meditation courses, how to be a better meditator. This way is better to meditate. Buy my course, buy my subscription, and I'll teach you how to do this. Or let me work like a dog all week and then pay for a yoga course on a Saturday morning, and flip, I did my yoga. So problem solved. I don't mean this. I mean getting in tune with your body, its rhythms, your mind, your thoughts on a more regular basis. And by mindfulness, I mean being in the present moment, being reflective or pensive, so nachdenklich. Yeah. Why did I behave that way? What am I doing right now? If I'm eating, am I shoveling food in my mouth while watching something on my phone, or am I concentrating on chewing? Am I concentrating on taste? Now, all this stuff sounds really difficult. It is, or these two things, not all these stuff. These two aspects sound difficult, and they are, but nobody says Rome was built in a day. Just maybe doing it once for a few minutes. and one day a week. And then it starts to build upon itself over time. So, additionally, be forgiving of yourself if you're not making progress as fast as you would like. But be more in tune with your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. Don't just plug into a matrix of pleasure and forget about all of these things going on with you. Thirdly, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Ikigai and the Bushido Code. Now, when I say Bushido Code, I definitely sound like someone like Jordan Peterson, if you know him, or Andrew Tate, all these guys saying, well, men are becoming too feminine, and that's the problem. I totally disagree with this idea. I don't think there is one definition of what it means to be a man, and that definition is being some kind of warrior. But I do think we can learn something from the concept of Ikigai and from the Bushido Code. Now, in my story at the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned just because I can doesn't mean I should, doesn't mean I must. And this is the concept of Ikigai, among other things, in Japanese. Ikigai also involves mindfulness, meditation, and so on and so forth. But this is a good way to good lens, a good philosophy to apply to your life. And do I have regrets? Sure. Do I think sometimes, am I missing out on something? Did I miss out on something when I was young? Sure. I think that sometimes. But then I think, should I, just because I could, does that mean I should have? And what was I feeling at the time? And then I think about the Bushido Code, which part of it is honor, part of it is loyalty, justice, and there are a few other. There are a few others. There are seven in total. And then I try to think about, did I apply all seven of these principles or some of them when I was doing something? And then these bad thoughts tend to go away. I stop feeling bad. Do they come back? Sure. They might even come back the next day. But the most important thing is I repeat this process over and over again. It's not the destination, as you'll see later, it's the journey. This is very cliche, but it's all about the right destination, right journey. Sorry, not the right destination. Returning to nature, you Austrians are really good at that. But I often find that Austrians, and this is just my opinion, that Austrians seek to conquer nature. I have to go and punish myself on this amazingly powerful hike. I have to ride my bike all of these kilometers until I feel like I'm going to collapse. At least that's my personal experience when someone has invited me on a hike or a bike ride or any kind of physical activity in nature. It's not really about communing with nature and being in nature. It's more about proving yourself against nature. That's just my opinion, simply how I feel. And I'm not saying all 8 million Austrians do this. That's just something I've experienced personally. When I say return to nature, I mean more like communing with nature, listening to the sounds around you, exploring nature, learning about the various plant life that you can use in your own life. And in fact, the Swedes have a word for this. It's called lagom. I had a Swedish girlfriend some years ago. She taught me about the concept of lagom, and it pretty much means just enough. Enough. And you do things just enough. You don't overdo them. And part of lagom is learning about nature and using nature, the nature around you. This brings me to my next point, Balkan virtues. Why am I saying Balkan virtues? Well, I married a Serbian woman from Bosnia, and before that, I had a an Albanian girlfriend. And I learn a lot from these cultures. They're often out in public, speaking with one another, conversating, drinking a coffee. They always make time for this. And many people from Germanic cultures or Anglo-Saxon cultures like the US would view them as lazy, not getting work done, not interested in proving themselves in their work. And I just think they have a healthier balance when it comes to work and life. And I think Balkan people really emphasize eating food that is seasonal and around them. When I was in Bosnia in springtime, I ordered spinach from the menu as a side dish, and they said, we don't have that. So I went to another restaurant the next day. I'd like some spinach. I wanted to get my greens in. And they were like, we don't have that. And then I thought, what time of year is spinach harvested? Turns out it's fall, early winter, and they don't have these things. They don't focus, maybe because they don't have a lot of capital, but they don't focus on bringing in, importing things that are not seasonal. And I think this is a very healthy attitude. If you go there, you see tons of people in the middle of the day drinking coffee, conversating, drinking rakia or something like that. And what they focus on is the virtue of socialization, of spending time with fellow people and not matrices of pleasure. That's just, again, this is my personal experience, how I feel about it. As I said before, recognizing the journey, not the destination, is really important. And I use the quote here, youth is wasted on the young, is that you typically don't learn these things until you're in your 40s or even 50s. So I'm approaching 40. I have 5 years to go. And I'm really just kind of starting to figure out what works for me, but I still do plenty of these things that are not good. I eat food that's not good for my current health situation. I do it anyway. I spend way too much time watching series and watching films and listening to the radio. I really love to eat. As I said, food doesn't matter if it's good for me or not. So I'm not really there yet. And maybe I'll never be there, but I'm just trying to be better with this every day. Now, the last and most important thing here is political organization, and don't be apathetic. How is the world going to change if the system we live in isn't changing? And we are all sold the idea that if you change the individual, you change the world. However, I think we really need to take a step back and think, I'm not so great, I'm not so important that everyone is going to follow my lead by my example. So you may become a vegan and express how important it is to be a vegan. And you think that by going on social media or arguing with people or just making good arguments to reasonable people is going to change hearts and minds. Well, I hate to tell you, we have more vegan products now than ever, and meat consumption is at an all-time high. It is the highest it's ever been, meat production, meat consumption. So something's not working here. And that something is you as the individual cannot change the world. We as a group, collective group of individuals can change the world. If we unplug ourselves from these matrices of pleasure and we find common ground with one another, what's the one thing that unites us? Let's focus on that. And then afterwards, when we get what we need, we can focus on the differences between us. Okay? And don't be apathetic. I feel like a lot of people say, I don't really care about politics. Well, you know who cares about politics? Your landlord, your manager, politicians, they care about politics. And you not caring is a part of this reflexive impotence. There's nothing I can do. Well, they are betting on that. They are betting that you feel, I don't care. There's nothing I can do. And so the wheel keeps on turning. But if you say, hey, you know what? Politics doesn't have to be watching boring discussions on public TV for 3 hours. Politics can be something as simple as I'm hungry. I'm tired from work. I'm paying too much for rent. Politics, everything can be political if you make it that way and you find other like-minded people. And I think this is the key to changing this system where we feel like something isn't working, but there's no way we can change it. So we plug into our systems of pleasure. That concludes my presentation on depressive anhedonia, the philosophy of emptiness. And I'd just like to show you some of my sources here. And since this is a recorded presentation, you cannot ask any questions to me now, but you can ask questions to Andrew, who is speaking to you in the classroom.